we are waiting. Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Um, Great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. It's really exciting to have this seminar. So before we get started, just want to kind of quickly introduce our committee. So we are the AGU Abstract Science Section Early Career Committee. And our committee actually provides resources for and creates to promote professional activities for the early career scientists. So within our committee, so we have different seminar webinar series, and we have some regular early career webinars. So the next one is actually happening next week on the May 29th. And we always solicitate abstract for consideration for those seminar. So if you are interested in joining as a speaker for our webinar, so please do submit your abstract to the link here. And you can always keep an eye on our newsletters and following our committee Twitter or X posting. So we will be posting our events and also news on those platforms. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact to submit or any feedback to the link here, or just email our committee. And you can always find more information on the website here. Also, just a quick note here, the meeting today will be recorded. And with that, I can see there's still people joining. I will stop share this slide, and I will just give a quick introduction about our speaker today. So it is actually my great pleasure. Oh, by the way, my name is Yao. I just graduated from Harvard University, and I'm on the atmospheric chemistry. It is my great pleasure to have Dr. Emily Fisher here as our speaker. So Dr. Emily Fisher is an atmospheric chemist and professor at Colorado State University. And Dr. Fisher and her team at CSU works to better understand the composition of the troposphere, with recent research focused on impacts of wildfires, oil and gas extraction, and industry agriculture on air quality. And in addition to his numerous scientific achievements, Dr. Fisher really distinguished herself in science communication and education. She is a member of the Science Month, which is a group of climate scientists dedicated to communicating about climate change to mothers in the US. And she also leads several research projects aimed at empowering women and other historically marginalized groups in STEM fields, which including the initiatives to prevent sexual harassment during field work. So today, we're very honored to have Dr. Fisher here to talk about some topics on leveraging field campaign networks to identify sexual harassment in atmospheric science and pilot promising interventions. With that, I will just hand over to Emily.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Thanks so much for having me. How does that look? Does that look right again?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, good. Thanks so much for having me, everybody. I am happy to spend the next hour or so talking through this topic. I prepared for today 20-ish slides because typically when I talk through this, there's lots of, there can be a rich discussion and there's lots that people want to talk about. So just as I go through, just keep in mind anything that you want to chat about after, and I'm happy to give you my sort of unvarnished perspectives on that. So this, I'll just give you, I'll start with a little bit of history. So I'm going to talk about a paper that came out in BAMS almost 3 years ago now, but it was based on an analysis that I did with a larger team. And it came to be because in 2018, there was, or maybe even 2017, but there was a National Academy report that came out on sexual harassment. And at that time, myself and Kristen Rasmussen were preparing to lead 2 different field campaigns. I was getting ready to lead WeCan, and she was getting ready to co-lead Melampigo. And we decided that we should try to figure out what best practices were. So we teamed with Brittany Bloodhart, who's a gender psychologist, and attempted to figure out what best practices might be to prevent anything from happening in our campaigns. And so that's how this came to be. So let's get started. So I would like this to be a little bit interactive if we can. So if you can speak up, or you could put in the chat and I'll watch the chat here. Why are field campaigns different than other settings? And I'll note what the pictures here are on the side. One is a picture of the cockpit of the C-130, and another one is myself in graduate school. I can see some of the people on this call might have known me in graduate school, so they can see I'm much younger there. But the person who's back here seeing is my PhD advisor, Dan Jaffe, and we're fixing a CO instrument in a kitchen. So anyway, how are field settings different than other settings? I'll give you a minute. You can either call out or you can write in the chat. Close quarters, long hours, away from usual institutional structure. Yeah, what else? Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you for being the first person. Different environment than usual. Could be in an isolated environment. Yep. What else? No bathroom sometimes. Yes, that's the case for Mount Bachelor where we were here. Thank you. Stress. Yes, high stress, right? And I'll just build on that a little bit and give you a hint of what's coming in the slide. Personal security might be an issue. Yep. Long hours. Yes. Great. Thank you for that. All right, so let's shift over to my list here, which covers a lot of what you brought up, right? There can be short windows to accomplish goals. There are extended working hours. There's reduced privacy, such as the example, I think Dan Jaffe was an amazing PhD advisor, but in this environment, right, we're clearly like in a house together. So reduced privacy, ability to retreat from social work interactions can feel less formal than our offices. Might be remote, can have additional safety concerns, which are brought up here. And then interactions with others can create unsafe environments. And so if you think about like sort of my field of atmospheric chemistry, right, and you kind of look at what was happening ahead of this field campaign in 2018, there was also this article in Scientific American with this quote: potential sexual harassment danger zones include field research, remote sites such as observatories. I spent much of my time before at CSU at observatories, isolated or smaller laboratories, such as where many of us do our graduate work, professional travel and meetings, and predominantly male fields, which is still atmospheric science, right? And so we are kind of in a space where there is the potential for problems. And we spend a lot of our time as scientists in these spaces. So at the same time, I think that field campaign teams engaging on this issue is really important. So one, field settings are really understudied in terms of sexual harassment. It's hard to study us, actually, many of us. These experiences, however, are really important for trainees. So they dramatically expand the networks and career potential for trainees, especially when there's large teams coming together, which is often the case in atmospheric science. And the interactions extend from the field into major conferences and science team meetings. For example, next week is the Aroma science team meeting, right? And so people that were on that field campaign are now getting together again. And so it just continues. So positive relationships are really important because they're long. Research shows that, though this is changing, I'll talk a little bit more about where I think we are now, but harassment policies up until 4 years ago were not routinely communicated, and harassment is also common. And I'll show you some data from the atmospheric science community here in a minute. At the same time, large collaborative multi-institutional teams will often come together for field programs. And then if we can come up with what we feel is best practices, then these are the networks that can actually facilitate change and sort of implement and extend things into their different institutions. So what we did back in 2018 through 2019 was to train major field campaign networks to recognize, report, and confront present and future situations of harassment. And then we investigated the perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, and experiences of atmospheric scientists in field settings regarding this issue. And then we continued to talk with this issue about our teams in many different settings. And so the project involved different major field campaigns. These are 4 big ones that were going on in that 2018-2019 framework, and they were all slightly different. And so I'm incredibly grateful to these teams and the PIs of these teams for engaging on this. So WeCan was a summer field campaign focused on wildfire smoke. It involved more than 5 different universities, and NCAR was domestic. Relampago occurred a bit later. I've got these sort of in the order that they occurred here. Was in Argentina, had several different universities and NCAR. The FireX campaign occurred in 2019. They also had multiple different bases, right? And was a NASA NOAA campaign. And then Cheesehead was a smaller campaign with a smaller aircraft. Multiple ground sites occurred in Wisconsin and occurred also in 2019, and also involved several different institutions. Whoop. So this is what the engagement process was with the teams involved in this. And this is important, so I'm going to walk through this. So the first thing that Brittany did was survey all 4 different field campaigns about past incidences of harassment. And she also measured different psychological scales. And that sample was 92 women, 166 men, and 7 other or did not identify. And so in our sample are more men than women, which is common, right, on an atmospheric science field program. And from there, we used what are early versions, and so slightly modified, you can think about, or early versions of advanced geo materials. So that project now is much more mature, right? And you can request to have an advanced geo training ahead of your field program. But at this time, we were kind of they were in an earlier stage, right? And so, and these trainings involve helping people identify, prevent, and intervene in relevant situations. And then after the field programs, Brittany resurveyed both field campaign teams, and she had a pretty good response, so not quite as large as initial, but 89 women, 140 men, 17 other. And then what we did was present the results to teams, discuss findings and path forward. And what I did was put, in my case, posters in the AMS science session. So within the science session was information about the harassment that had occurred pre and during. We had a lunch meeting at AMS to bring everybody together, and we also had science team meetings. We also extended this to the Atmospheric Science Gordon Conference eventually. So this is what the surveys look like. They were just an online survey sent before and after each campaign. Like myself, as somebody in these teams and as the PI, I did not have access to the data. And so because that would not be appropriate. But this is what it looks like. The PIs were mainly facilitating and helping make sure that the surveys were distributed. These, in case you're not familiar with it, you can look this up on the side. This is sort of an old screenshot of this, but these are workshops that have several different components. The one that we did was recognize harassment, how to be an effective bystander, and we thought through our code of conduct. So what we did that I think was really important was after the WeCan training, we hired actually a consultant to help us add a teamwork wrapper for Relampago. And so in that setting, we introduced the harassment training with a little bit more on the importance of building teams and what effective teams look like. So other intervention measures at that time, including codes of conduct, and procedures. It was sort of interesting working through this with the lawyers at the different universities. You can't have a policy, but you can have a procedure. And then in Relampago, they did a nice job having a little handout with other resources, and also had people sign something. So let's talk about these survey results. So my question for you is, if you haven't heard me give this talk before, if you want to put in the chat, what percentage of women on the field teams had experienced sexual harassment prior to the field campaigns in a work setting, in a relevant work setting? So the question is framed like you're in a setting that's relevant to the job you have now. Who wants to guess? Don't be shy. Happy to have participation. I can't see your faces anymore. So 70%, it's a little lower than that, but it's still quite high. 60%, you're just going to notch it down a little higher than that. All right, good job. So let me show you. Okay. So this is the data, and I'll take a minute to walk through this so that you can get a sense of what this data actually is and how it works if you don't work on this, which I don't normally. So the number is 52% of women had experienced sexual harassment prior to the campaign. So it's about half of us. And so as I look at this, as you look at this figure, we've got women in blue. Sorry, I got something in my eye here. Women in blue, orange are men. And although it's very, very important for the earth science community to examine the experiences of trans and gender nonconforming members, we don't have enough participants in this study to report on the perceptions and experiences of those who identified outside of women or men. That's a very small number, so you can't form a statistically big enough or unidentifiable group. So as I aggregate, that's why I have it aggregated in this way. So when you collect this survey data, those experiences, which can be, it's a big click list of like, have you experienced these things? Those are grouped into first either tier 1 or tier 2 experiences. And that's what the gray is here. And that's what this arrow is here. So there's tier 1 and tier 2. In tier 1, they're either coded, when you sort of code a survey, as either a hostile work environment or quid pro quo. So quid pro quo is, right, if you do this, I will do that, versus hostile work environment, which includes many, many different things, which I'll talk about in a second. And so second, those same experiences get coded into belonging into any of the tier 2 experiences. And those include, as you can read across the bottom here, so let me move my chat. Those include visual harassment, verbal harassment, physical harassment, and physical assault. Thus, an experience can fall into both a tier 1 and a tier 2 categorization. Each experience has one categorization. So the overwhelming majority of the incidences that were reported, which is 430 out of about 460 different things that were clicked on these forms, of experiences that occurred prior to the campaign, was a hostile work environment. And women are more likely, which is why the blue is bigger than the orange, right, are more likely to experience that, and they report on average several incidences each when they report it. So the majority of women are experiencing some type of physical harassment at work in the past, and over about 1/3 of women are experiencing quid pro quo in the past, compared to a very 5% of men. So this sort of shows a couple things here. One, men and women might see this issue differently, and two, it actually affects both genders. So what was also interesting about the past data is that once people disclosed this, right, they then disclosed whether they reported it or not. And so 80% of the past harassment that people disclosed in the survey, they said they had not reported. And of those disclosing the harassment, about 60% of the time, they coped with past experiences by just avoiding their harasser or downplaying incidents, which are very common coping mechanisms. And of the only 35% of women and 17% of men who disclosed harassment, only that number indicated that at least one of their instances was actually confronted. So what do you think happened in the field campaigns? So keep in mind that these were teams that had some harassment training. They had a code of conduct. There were, 250 people surveyed. How many incidences were reported in the post-campaign surveys across the 4 teams? How many do you think? None. That is very optimistic. So 20, there were 47 things actually that came out reported in the post-campaign surveys, and those were reported by 30 different people. So a range of inappropriate behavior still occurred during the field project studied here. So there are 47 reported by 30, and the majority of them were hostile work environment, which, if you think about what's happening in a field program, right? You mentioned this in your chats, right? These are like very high pressure. We're often not at our best. The most common behavior included another person intentionally putting their hands on someone's body, using obscene or abusive language, or making sexual jokes or comments. What is pretty interesting is that men are more likely to report obscene or abusive language, although in the survey it wasn't specified who that was directed at. So that's the first thing. Sorry, I got off track in my brain here. Men are equally as likely as women to report hearing sexual comments about clothing, anatomy, looks, or being asked personal questions about their sexual life. So there's, again, most harassment experienced during the field campaigns was not confronted or reported, despite all the training and encouraging. And so it was reported in this survey, but not actually confronted or reported via another mechanism, even though on these field programs there were, designated procedures for doing that. So as we think about this and we want to solve this as a community, one thing that I think is really important is to also understand some of the details here. So men and women, and I'm sure those that don't conform to those two categories, we all are experiencing this differently. So what's plotted here is the percent of reports. And then on the bottom here is like a woman who experienced harassment, men who experienced harassment. So it's gender here. And then seniority. So trainee who experienced or versus a senior person. And then as we go, the colors here say who did the harassing. So either a female harasser, male harasser, or I do not wish to answer. So women are getting harassed by men. Men are getting harassed by a mixture or don't want to say. Probably a mixture, right? So trainees are being often, trainees and senior people, and I'm going to talk more about this in a second, may be experiencing this slightly differently if we look over here. So a trainee who is experiencing harassment is most likely harassed by someone more senior at the same level. A senior person is less likely to be harassed by someone who is more senior than them. So there's some different power dynamics here. So women who are experiencing harassment are likely experiencing it from a man who is more senior. So when you go to a meeting, when you're me and you go to a meeting, one thing that more senior women say is, gosh, I thought this was done. And if I reflect on my experiences too, I would say the same thing, like, wow, nobody has harassed me lately. Awesome. But that is because this is about power, right? And so the data also suggests that harassment continues to be a problem for early career colleagues. So in these pre-campaign surveys, 60% of the junior people, so the trainees, communicated they had already experienced some form of harassment, right? So they haven't even been working that long, and they've already experienced this. And during the field programs, a larger number of junior people disclosed as a percentage, sorry, a larger percentage of junior level participants disclosed experiencing some form of harassment versus the senior level people. So more than double, right, as a percentage. So while we get more senior, and those of you who are more senior, I think our ability to see what's happening will be diminished because it is not a good idea, right, to do this right in front of the PI of a campaign or something like that. So if we look at the training, so nobody likes to sit through sexual harassment training, right? And Brittany looked at sort of gender differences in response to the harassment training. And she's broken it up, same colors, senior women, trainee women, senior men, trainee men are the colors here. And these are sort of positive emotions, negative emotions, and other emotions. So both men and women were likely to report more positive, looks like I have a typo on my slide there, more positive emotions than negative emotions. So you can see like these bars are higher, are larger, they more to the right than these negative emotions. But the way we react to these trainings is quite different. And I can, without like giving away sort of things people have said to me, I will say that senior men that I trust and I think I have a reasonable relationship with have said, gosh, yeah, I do feel sometimes blamed, like, this is hard to be in there. And so you see in this, like women more likely to feel supported and men are more likely to report feeling bored or annoyed. And some of the blame shows up here, some afraid, right? And so the way we think about this, to make something effective, we need to think about how people also are reacting to this and acknowledging the differential experiences that will occur based on our positionality. So one thing that's really positive is there are very promising examples of behavioral change in the written comments after the field campaigns. So one man reported that he felt enabled to call out the use of jokes being shared among team members on an online platform due to the training, which is great. And one of the women reported that 2 of her male colleagues helped her leave a situation in which she was being harassed. She was being harassed by a person unaffiliated with the field campaign team, but her teammates were able to name it and check whether she was okay in a way that she felt was effective. So this is what I think the path forward is, not I should have said Kristen, everybody on that paper, and particularly Kristen and Brittany and I, is that we still continue to work to understand the prevalence of harassment in our larger community and our sub-communities. I think anonymously surveying communities is the way to go, in addition to reviewing relevant research. What's important, I think, is that while we can read a report that says harassment is an issue, the bar we need to get over, or the barrier we need to get over to have people meaningfully engage, is not to just recognize that it happens here, but to recognize that it's happening here, right? So we don't want to believe that this could happen in our community, and it has happened in my own community, right? And it's very hard. So the next thing is to implement best practices. And I think it is still unclear exactly what best practices are going to be. And I was down in a meeting in Boulder last week and having a discussion with someone about this. I'm actually surprised how the lack of progress in the last couple of years in terms of us coming together to decide what is best practices and what does it look like in all different settings. So it's not that the things don't exist. I just feel like sometimes they're a bit of an afterthought and we're still not sure exactly how to implement them best. But for sure, we should be having advanced geo training, or I've just heard of field futures. So some other team building And that should be incorporated with safety related activities because it doesn't belong in a vacuum. It belongs part of a safety discussion. So I work with the University of Wyoming King Air pilots. And you know, when I said, I want to do this training, I think at first they were like, why do you need to do this training? And I explained to them, I was like, well, you know, people who do safety trainings are not in the business of crashing planes. So doing a safety training does not mean that you are doing it in response to or expecting that you are going to crash the plane. You do it because you follow best practices, period. Developing clear code of conduct is really important, including response procedures and multiple avenues for reporting. This is super tricky. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it. But when you bring together different Title IX offices and reports things to Title IX, the timeline of things is different. There might be different ways of responding. And so it's good to have a talk through of what might happen. And then it's important to resurvey communities after major activities to give people the opportunity to report anonymously, right? Because at least all the academic professors, right, we're all mandatory reporters. That will change the way people approach us. We know that harassment largely goes unreported. And so, and we also know that participants who do training are more likely to intervene. Okay, so then I think we need to do a better job, and I would say this across all DEIJ activities. We need to be better integrating dialogue on this issue and many other issues into larger community settings. So I think it's good to host discussions about this in specific communities. So it pushes us to this, it happens here, and allows everyone to sort of come to the table. When you are doing a large campaign, particularly something that is international, I think it will take a lot of time to do a good job on multicultural development of community standards by the campaign leadership and participants. And the goal is really to make this data more visible and more people to engage. So that's that. I have some other extra materials, but I'm happy to just start a discussion of whatever would be helpful to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I think people who have questions should feel free to just unmute yourself and speak out, or you can put your question on the chat.
Yeah, and I have some slides of like they're in the paper too, of sort of a list of things to do. We can talk about that, but I didn't want to put up slides of just text. It might be better for us to talk about it and then summarize something like that. Give a gold star to whoever puts the first question in the chat. Very sparkly, lovely gold star.
All right. Cool.
Did you collect data on why or why not people did not officially report harassment? No, but I can share a little bit about that. So here, let me pull a slide up and I'll talk, and then I can say some comments. So this is how people, here, let me just reshare my screen for you and then we'll answer that. So here we go, share. Let me make that bigger. So this is a little bit more about the not reporting. So by who did it, so this is by the person who reported or received the harassment, trainee women, senior women, trainee men, senior men. And this is a little bit of a weird axis here, which is why I don't have it in the main talk. But most people are avoiding or denying or using sort of social coping rather than confronting or seeking advocacy. There's a couple reasons why, if this would be, feel free to jump in the chat if anybody else has a specific example. But this is about power, right? And so if you are a junior person and you report harassment and your PI has not made it known to you how they will react and how they will respond, then that might put you at a risk that suddenly you're not talking about science, you're talking about this. And if you don't know the relationship between that PI and the person that harassed you, you might not be willing to risk that, especially if you feel there's no imminent physical danger to anyone else around you, right? So just given the power dynamics here, and that's normally why it is because of the power dynamics. But we did not collect that. Can you comment on the value of in-person versus asynchronous bystander intervention training? Thanks, Becky. So I think that there's high value in teams doing everything they can to make sure they work well together and that people are comfortable raising any kind of safety issue. And so I think that doing as much synchronously, but it's often impossible to do it all together, is a good idea. So I think there's good versions of doing things, these bystander intervention trainings virtually, but all together. I think that's good. I think that one training, as we see here, is not enough, right? There needs to sort of be a constant reminder of our best practices. I don't know how to do that in the context of a big field program. I actually, when we wrote this proposal, I said, oh yeah, during weekend and during our weekly or bi-weekly science team meetings, maybe I'll send out some things for people to read and interesting articles and things. Yeah, right. Like we're all way too busy to do that. So I think there needs to be follow-up, but I don't know what that looks like. Like that's a piece that I'm not exactly sure what that follow-up looks like. I feel pretty good about the training. I feel pretty good about writing a code of conduct. I feel pretty good about setting the standards. I feel pretty good about who might people be how to set structures up for reporting to take out the power dynamic, but how to sort of remind people as we go along. I don't know what that structure, without it being very awkward and always feeling like a distraction from what we're doing because it's so stressful sometimes. Do you want to say anything, Becky, about that? Do you have ideas?
I guess the one thing I was curious about, because I am involved in writing some of these best practices, is would you recommend synchronous? You're right, it's not necessarily in person, but synchronous versus asynchronous. I agree with you. I think that it's really valuable to be able to have discussions together. So is that something that you strongly recommend in your best practices already?
Yeah. So where I'm recommending that training is done together. A comment on that training that I would also make that's important to think about, and I see some other things in the chat, including a direct message. So thank you for that from someone else. So I'll say that in a second. So that training, I think we don't have enough trainers. There's a real capacity issue, and that training should ideally be done by mixed gender leaders. So most of this training right now is being done by women. That is not a good idea. The reason I'm not saying this because I think it. There is literature on this, and it is better to have mixed gender leaders when you're talking about something like this. The perspectives are different. People respond to, they can make different connections with the trainers. And when I did this at CSU, practicing this I always had Jeff Pierce, Michael Bell, somebody with me up there, right? And that was really, I think, important for the graduate students who are men to have their perspectives being shared on, oh, it looks like this, or, oh, I see this, right? Like that's really important. So I think it should be synchronous, and I think we need more men who are well trained. Okay, so let's go back to reasons for not reporting. So there there can be trauma, there can be this power, and maybe a better thing to think is retaliation. And then, you know, they also might feel that there's people don't have power to actually do anything about it. So there's many reasons for people not reporting. Okay, let me do Richard. So you spoke about the legal difficulties about composing codes of conduct dealing with diverse groups, government employees, university people, non-US. We're having the same problem with NASA field campaigns and understanding what we can legally do in the field to deal with serious issues. Do you have thoughts on how to deal with issues in the field in real time? Yes. Okay, so I think when you report something to Title IX, what happens from a university perspective, right? If you've never done this before, you report something, then you are essentially not allowed to do much while there's an investigation going on. So I think if something is reported, and we have this in our code of conduct, if something is known, let's do the word reported versus known. When something is sort of brought to the attention, that can be written, I think, into a code of conduct as a procedure. And I think that's okay. And so we have that in we had that in the we can procedures, and it was those two people will be immediately separated. Now that is awkward, and that is why we should have redundancy on field programs. So there should be more than one person that can do all jobs, so that when you need to separate people, that can actually be done in a way that doesn't compromise the science. Another thing to think about here is if you look at this National Academy report, there's, I'll paraphrase this, I won't get it exactly right, but while the legal structures are very important, the culture change is what's going to solve the problem and prevent it, right? And so spending as much care as possible, I think, in getting everybody on the same page of preventing issues is where a lot of our time really should be spent. It's really awful, right, when something does occur. And it's long and drawn out, and it breaks the trust of the whole team, and it's just not good. So yes, but I think this is a thing to figure out is, and I've also, without throwing anybody under the bus, when we were writing some of this code of conduct and procedures, some of the universities involved were not even willing to sign that and say, and some of the university's Title IX offices were under investigation at that time. I won't name which one that was, but like there are, even if you know what to do, the people at their different institutions may not even trust their offices for various reasons, right? So I do think that writing down as a team what you're going to do and agreeing on that as a team is a good idea. And it can be a procedure, not a policy. That's how I managed it here at CSU. CSU was supportive. Our legal office was very supportive, and they were happy with it being a procedure. If this happens, you will do this. You will separate these people. This will be the time frame. This is what will happen. So they were happy with that. Can you give an example of reporting and follow-up procedures? I've not seen these laid out clearly. Oh yeah, I can. Let me see if I can just pull up the weekend one really quick over here on the side. And I just was writing one for Salt Lake City SOS as a team to figure out what we're going to do. Let me just, and those are also in that paper. I have them as SI. I have the 3 of them. I don't remember which ones I put in there. Safety plan. Where is the operations? I'm trying to find it here. Okay, I'll find that on the side and post a link to it in the chat here for you, so you can kind of see that. What are some examples of consequences if people are harassed, don't feel like they're harassed, maybe they also feel less likely to report? I think that people can, and this is hard to do, but I mean, this is the first thing that should be done in this situation here would be to give that person, I think, with their respective HR representative, a letter of expectations, right? A very clear documentation of what expectations are is even if they've seen the code of conduct, they have a code of conduct at their institution, if anything deviates from that and that is reported, I think the first thing I would do is be to document sit down and document with them a clear letter of expectations, is the first thing that I think should occur. And I think it's better to address things quickly, rather than let them get out of control. So a quick direction, hey, this is what the norms are. I noticed when you did this, that that crossed a line. From there, if it continues, those behaviors, that person should be removed from the group. And I think that's how I would draw a pretty hard line there. Because once you've received a letter of expectations, if you're not following that, you're not a great team player. The other thing I would say is that people who act in this way typically have other ethical issues. There's research on that as well. So there's probably other scientific misconduct in addition to this type of misconduct. How would you expect these results to differ for smaller campaigns? Yeah, so smaller campaigns are tricky, and I don't know exactly what best practices look like. I'll tell you some things that I'm starting to do. When I take an undergraduate, for example, I only take 2. I do not take 1. So where there could be a place for power dynamics and communication issues, I try to pair people. So that is a funding issue though, right? Like I think when we have students or any kind of trainee, anywhere where you can build in redundancy and working as teams, so there's a sort of buddy systems, then I think that will prevent some of this. Smaller teams, it's a bit awkward, right, to conduct this sexual harassment training with a really small team, right? It involves scenarios that you discuss, and it's hard to do that with a really tiny group. So in that case, right, this should be done at the in an academic setting. This can be done at a department level, right? So that this is conducted for broad groups of people who do field work. And yeah, wait, oh, thank you. There's a link. So what I would say though, like if you think about the results that I presented, the past harassment, that could have occurred on smaller campaigns, right? It didn't necessarily occur, and not all of it did, right? On large field programs. That occurred in all sorts of settings, right? In elevators, in departments, in small lab settings, these kinds of things, smaller field sites. What I would say about this like code of conduct, what I do with my teams what I'm doing now for like the field program that's next summer and the summer after that. That code of conduct is now we have an example to work from, right? A prior field campaign, but like I'm still having that iterated with the PIs. Right? I'm still taking the time for us to sort of struggle a little bit and then take this and run this by your Title IX office and run this by, right? Like, so and that is, and I think the process there is important because everybody has to read it, has to think about how they might actually do something with it. And that is an important part of education and buy-in. So I think just like taking a document, right? We can have templates, but like if you start just taking documents and then not actually taking the time to review them, I don't think that will actually help for the culture change. Then it becomes a thing that's like, we have to do this versus we want to do this. And this is how we run things to make the best functioning team. How variable are codes of conduct? I don't think that they need to be that variable. I don't think a code of conduct needs to be that variable. What needs to be variable would be the reporting procedures probably, and the points of contact and those kinds of things. But at this point, it would be great, like our department has a new code of conduct, right? That we spent a lot of time as a community iterating. I am hopeful that most people are also, as they come together, also coming from institutions where those discussions have also occurred, and they're bringing that already to the table. What else? Did I answer? Are any of your questions? Want some more? What are you worried about?
So I actually have a follow-up on the kind of the reporting issue. So I have been in part of several different field campaigns, and it feels like all of those campaigns we have like kind of system or person who in charge of the reporting thing, but they're actually from different. Some of them are people from funding agency, and some of them are people from the PI teams. So, and I can see like how things work differently. So could you give a little bit more comment on that? Like, or what would you think would be a better like reporting? Who is in charge of the reporting system would be more beneficial?
Well, so there's some things to keep in mind, right? So if as a professor, I am a mandatory reporter. If you told me right now on this phone call or in the chat that there was an issue, I have to report it. And there's a couple reasons why that's good, and there's a couple reasons why that just makes it hard for my relationship to other people, right? So that's good that I'm a mandatory reporter and that even small things get reported. The reason why is because often in these types of issues, we can each only see a little bit, right? So if I said, oh, that's not an issue, right? And then someone else said, that's not an issue, but it's actually like edges of a very large issue of which we all can't see what's happening. We cannot see the big picture. We can only see our tip of the iceberg. So that's good, right? That's good but that also means that, that someone might not come to me right away because they think, I don't need this. I just want it to stop. Like if I just want someone to say, knock it off. That person also teaches me a lot of things, but this specific aspect of their behavior, I do not want to continue, right? And so they might not address that, right? So it is hard to have faculty be listed as the person people could come to raise an issue, right? It's very hard. So it's also hard to have someone in that position who other people report to directly, right? Because then there's some power and other relationship dynamics. So what I'm trying to do is identify people when I'm on a large team, identify people that are not directly supervising anyone, and identify a couple people of different, maybe someone from the aircraft crew and someone from an academic team, for example, like that. So different positions, different genders, and no one is directly reporting to them. That's a lot to put on those people, right? And those people might not be trained to deal with these kinds of experiences. So that's a problem. What I think is another thing that I would think broadly about is, I have this other research hat with focused on mentoring, right? And so most harassment is occurring to trainees, right? So there's some cross between mentoring and this issue, I think, in terms of our ability to manage it. So my students, I strongly prefer that they have very wide mentoring networks, that if they can't come to me, there is someone else, right? So that means I give up some power, right? Like I'd love to co-advise, I'd love to, right? Like, but I am trying as much as I can to build their network beyond me as fast as possible and as wide as possible and as deep as possible. And part of that is that if something happens on my team, they can go to someone else, right? If they won't come to me for various reasons, there should be someone else that they can go to that can help them navigate, that they can essentially delegate to help them navigate. So I think we have sort of an outdated structure, right? In how we train people. It's very hierarchical, and we think, oh, there's an advisor, there's an advisee, there's like this chain. Breaking that chain as much as possible from a mentoring perspective, I think will help these issues get addressed, right? To allow trainees to problem solve with other people to address the issue. Is there possible to have someone outside the field campaign? yes, I think that's would be okay. But I also think that person should have, it would be good if that person had some experience with field programs, because they then may realize the timeliness of responding, right? Because I think sometimes people who are very well trained to deal with these difficult issues may not have the perspective of like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening in the field program, and there's all these pressures to get these things done, and that like I think we could serve that role, I think, within our community, where if someone else is running a field program, one of us could be a external person. So maybe that's a structure we could set in place. And then some of those people could be, so we could have sort of common standards of responding and questions we might ask, things like that, so that those people were supported. Yes, so this, I keep thinking about discrepancy between anonymous and real reports. So there are structures that some places have put into place where there are anonymous reports. I think Stanford has something like this. You report, but then you're connected if there's another report against the same person. I forget exactly how it works. So a 3-strike system before a complaint being made public, like that's an interesting idea. I don't know what the legal ramifications are of that. Yeah, I don't know. Like, and also I think a complaint made public is a bit of a not the right way to think about this. If you report something, for example, to a Title IX office, it's like the opposite of being made public. In fact, like what happens is, like I've reported something recently. So I report the thing, this is what happens. You call Title IX. They say, now we're going to investigate. Please do not do anything. Please do not talk to any of these parties, because you don't, if the complaint is not valid or something like that, you don't want there to be this perception of retaliation too, right? So it's actually quite held, that information is held quite tightly. And so I think also having people understand that if a report is made, actually the information is held quite tightly unless there's like an immediate physical safety risk. Like the process is actually quite slow, and that's actually a problem, is how slow the process is for this kind of thing. I agree, it should be 1 strike of certain things. At the same time, I don't think it helps anyone to feel like if they put their foot in their mouth, they can't just apologize, right? Because we're all humans, and like, I know Glenn fairly well, so I'm just going to say, like, Glenn, how many times have you or I put our feet in our mouths? Like how many times have we said something dumb, right? Like, and then you don't think about it, right? So I think the ability to apologize, the culture to be like, shoot, I'm really sorry, that did not come out right. And that trust, so that we're not like constantly on edge, is there you go. His foot is in his mouth right now. So that trust, right, is really, really important. So that if someone makes what is a relatively minor mistake, it can be corrected immediately in the moment, or a bystander says, gosh, you didn't mean that, don't do, and they say, gosh, I'm sorry, right? Like that also needs to occur. I don't know when we end. Are we ending now? Sorry, I have no idea how long, because I'm forgetting now. Because my calendar's not open. I'm looking at all of you.
We have like 30 more minutes. So
okay.
If there are more questions, we can always end early. We don't have to.
Yeah.
So
right. It just dinged me, and I was like, oh no, wait a minute. Did I just 2 minutes over?
No, we're good. Yeah. Okay. That's one more question.
This is a great question, Josh. This is a really great question. I'm less familiar with this literature, but it is a weakness of what I presented to you by nature of the teams that were surveyed. We did not break that data up by race, ethnicity, because it becomes identifiable. But we do know that these issues are typically more severe with people who have multiple marginalized identities. That's typically where problems are worse. And so the advanced geo team, I'm trying to think if they have a paper, and I'm trying, I know, or maybe it was a talk. I'll see on the side here if I can find that, where they broke experiences up. I can't remember. It might be crazy. I'll see if I can find it here. Here's a list of publications that are really helpful. Yeah, this is what I'm thinking of, this +1 paper. Here, this is what I'm thinking of, I think. Here you go. It talks a little bit overlapping impacts of different issues. Based on the authorship of your BAMS paper, it seems like women are leading this effort for the most part. Have you had more interest from men in these efforts after publishing the paper? No, not necessarily, but I've had some really interesting dialogue, even at like our science team meetings, and I won't name the names of this person, but a man who I respect, who I think is a great leader, right? So all these things. We're in a room, and I asked them to I was like walking around with a microphone trying to get people to participate in classroom mode. And he was like, I can't, like, this is too much. I don't want to say something wrong. I just so it is a little bit scary. So anything that we can do to, I think, actually welcome men to become trained and comfortable to talk about this issue and to set norms and expectations, I think would be a very good investment. And some grace also for when they mess up. So I think that's something that I said explicitly to members of my team. I was like, come to the table, participate in this workshop, and when you mess up, I will assume goodwill and we will move forward, and you will, that is, and because this is hard, nobody knows exactly how to do this best. So I think that is important. And I mean, what might be really neat, right, is to do, sometimes NSF has these workshops and these these leadership programs to strategically recruit for people who lead field programs to just become a little more knowledgeable on how to respond to things and the strong literature base behind the recommendations, and also to be a little more trauma informed, I think. So yeah, so I think the Advanced Geo team has a lot of resources and does a lot of great training. I can't say that anybody did that because of participating in anything that I did, though. The Advanced Geo program, the paper I just shared with you, is from Eager, an NSF Eager. It's a really tiny little project. It was meant to be a little tiny project, right? The Advanced Geo project is massive, covers lots of ground, provides excellent resources. And that's the link that I put there for those publications. I think I can just speak to this because I'm trying stuff in my own teams. And so that's the perspective I bring, is I'm like, oh, what's that best practice? Okay, how do I do this in a practical way that feels like it'll actually work? Perhaps a bit outside the scope here, but are there ways you think help set people for success during field work, long days, stress? Yes. So I do think there's things, and like a big Gantt chart, so everybody's on the same page, redundancy, I think if you plan rest, you're able to like sprint when you need to, right? Versus if you're sort of planning to max out all the time. I think that this can be hard to do, but I think it's easy for us when we budget, right? To be like, gosh, I budgeted for hotels, but now I'm going to do an Airbnb because that hotel doesn't have a kitchen. And so somebody on my team wants a kitchen. So I'm going to put them all in an Airbnb together. So that can lead to problems, right? It just doesn't give people the separation that they need and the downtime. So I think in thinking about planning for field campaign deployment locations and budgets, some extended stay places where people can still have retreat to privacy and not have to have every single interaction with their team, I think is a good preventative measure. And I'm laughing a little bit in my head. When I was a grad student, we first started staying at this absolutely terrible motel, right? Because it was in budget, right? And it was good. We could each have our own rooms, right? But in the end, the grad students were like, can we please just have a condo with like a joint kitchen, please? This is right. So but it needs to be decided as a team, right? What actually works for that team. So I think thinking about lodging and field work is something that I would consider pretty strongly, like making sure that you separate lodging when there are power differences. And yes, require hard down days for scientists is a good idea. The other thing I would say, I don't have a sense of the mixture here. Like when we put this together, I was thinking it was all for early career people. There's not all early career people on this phone call right now. So I think as a leader or a non-trainee, the way that you act and those norms that you set is quite important. So never yell at anyone. Like, don't show your stress, period. That's like very, very important to make sure that you remain approachable.
Great.
All right. Well, I hope I provided you with some resources at least, even if imperfect responses to things. I think also just remember, as those of you who are in sort of more senior leadership positions, as you get more senior, I think it becomes harder to see this from the perspective of a trainee. And that is where this is going to occur because it's about power, not about anything else, right? And so as you grow in power, it's very easy for us to think it's getting better. And yes, it may be getting better, right? But our ability to see it is also being diminished. And so that's like every time I think about giving a talk like this, I'm like, do I really need to talk about this again? They can like read the paper. But I think it's good that yes, Glenn, we need metrics, but we also need to say our stand on it so that it's just clear where we stand, right? Because if you don't say anything, it's just not clear where you are in terms of your feelings on this. Mention several lessons, institutional red tape, procedures versus policy. I don't know if we have all that written down. I have in the paper, like I have it separated out. The way we ended up doing this paper was quite a bear. It took my pandemic. It was my pandemic project. Like in the paper, we laid it out as things from the surveys, right? Which we learned from the surveys, which is sexual harassment is a problem. We know that. Junior colleagues are more likely to be harassed. Targets are most likely to avoid or deny incidents. Bystander intervention training is largely good, and community-wide efforts should be engaged in. So from the survey, know that from the actual research part. From the sort of practical side of things, some lessons that I would say are team members engage more deeply when they hear that members of their community are experiencing harassment. It is a bit of a mic drop in a room when I say 50% of the women in this room have experienced harassment. Right? Like that's like, oh, look around the table. Oh, okay. Right? Who is that? Oh, I don't want that happening. I care about these people, right? So I think the second thing is that this works better and is less awkward and more effective if it's integrated into a broader, respectful, kind culture, right? And there's lots of research coming out now, right, that kindness is really important for STEM culture. So training needs to be mixed gender leaders if possible. There will be legal red tape, but as a lawyer, I don't know what it's going to look like. For me, it was like, this needs to be a procedure. Tell us what you're going to do, not a policy. That was fine at CSU. But again, like the University of Wyoming, I've worked multiple times now with the University of Wyoming. I don't know how they're going to respond to the code of conduct each time. I think, oh, this was, and then they won't sign it and they want something and then to change it. Like, so it's very variable. I think who's sitting in some of these offices. So I don't know. I would just start early. There's plenty of examples though of codes of conduct. Like the Advanced Geo page has nice examples of code. I'll get there and put it there for you. And that you can take pieces of it as it applies to you, right? So there's under resources here. There's a whole code of conduct section. And I can't figure out if this is where. Hang on, this might not be the link I'm thinking of. I got to find this. There's a whole list of examples here somewhere. Under resources, there it is. Sorry, wrong thing. Here it is. This is all the resource page. Sorry, I sent you the wrong one. And if you go to code of conduct, there's a really good resources on how to write your own. And a bunch of examples. And you can see the weekend one is there. Oh, they took it off the EOL website. That's why I can't find it. All right, I'll see why the weekend one is no longer on the EOL website. For people who are students, what do you think you can help with these efforts? Yes, bystander, right? Because more junior people are more likely to see it. So therefore, you are more likely to be able to do an intervention. So if you know the 5 Ds, distract, delegate, defer, sorry, double back. I'm going to be quick. I'm going to miss one of them. But if you know the 5, like hollaback 5 Ds, and you've sort of practiced them, that's what our results sort of show, is that people are more comfortable responding after having those tools. I think, yes, you can ask for code of conducts if they don't exist. Those are all good things. And so I think those are you've named right there, Alyssa, like 2 really good things that you can do. Be ready to do that. And so as a student, if you know about something, it is okay for you to delegate. And a way to do that and the principle you want to use here, though, is that you always protect and respect the person who's experienced the harm, right? So you don't want to speak out on behalf of someone without their buy-in, right? Because you may not understand all the politics and their worries. So always, if there's immediate harm, you should raise something, but also just make sure that you are protecting the victim. But you'd learn that from your bystander training too. Arias, okay.
I see no more questions. All right. Here's Oh, great. Yeah. All right, if there's no more questions, let's just give Emily another round of applause. It's really nice. I learned a lot, and I'm sure like people here also benefit a lot from those competitions. Yeah, thanks again, Emily.
Thank you.
Also, if people, I will just post it again on the chat. So if people have any question or feedback you want to report, you can click the link or email us, and please follow us to get updated with like more events we're hosting. Yeah, great. Thank you everyone for joining.
See you
And,
all soon.
thanks,
Bye.
Emily. Yeah, thank you.